There are men who walk among us, without rank, without medals, without fanfare. Men who once carried skies on their shoulders and now push a quiet mop across a steel deck at dawn. Most never look twice. They see a janitor, a nobody, but one ordinary morning, one harmless joke from an admiral, unlocked a truth the Navy was never prepared to face. A nobody answered with a number, and the ocean held its breath. What if the quietest man in the room once protected a nation louder than any applause could honor? What if the hero we missed was standing right in front of us all along before we begin? If stories of humility, sacrifice, and quiet courage speak to your heart, I gently invite you to subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing tales that lift the spirit and remind us of the goodness still left in this world. Now, let us begin. And remember, sometimes the quiet ones are quiet for a reason. Morning sunlight slid across the steel skin of the aircraft carrier, turning the ocean into a sheet of trembling silver. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries swallowed by the hum of machinery and the distant roar of helicopter blades preparing for drills. Sailors marched in formation boots, striking the deck in steady rhythm, metals glinting as the Navy's proud heartbeat echoed beneath them. Among them stood a man no one noticed at first, a figure in faded green coveralls pushing a mop bucket. He didn't belong to the crisp lines and polished brass around him. His hair sun-darkened and slightly long for regulation brushed his collar. His shoulders carried a quiet gravity. He moved with a steadiness that didn't come from routine, but from knowing what real chaos looked like and valuing peace more for it. His name stitched in worn thread over his chest read M. Carter. Michael Carter. To most on this massive warship, he was just the janitor. Beside him, a little girl in a white dress clutched his hand, tiny fingers wrapped around a world she trusted. Emily, 6 years old, with sandy blonde hair and those big, curious eyes only children untouched by heartbreak have. She held a single red rose, fresh dew still clinging to its petals, as if it had been picked that very morning with hope and ceremony. "Daddy," she whispered, tipping her head back to look up at him as they reached the center of the deck. "Do people fly off this boat like in the movies?" Michael's lips curved the kind of smile that was more memory than expression. "They do, sweetheart. Some fly. Some don't come back from where they go." Emily nodded solemnly as though she understood. In a way she did. Children often feel truth before they fully know it. A group of young sailors walked past, laughing about something. One glanced at Michael's worn uniform, then at the mop bucket. The laughter slipped into a snicker. Someone muttered under their breath, "Maintenance crew." Michael didn't react. Years had taught him that dignity wasn't in titles or recognition. It lived in quiet choices, in the way a man carried himself when no one saluted him anymore. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, can I give you the flower now?" He knelt beside her, lowering himself so their eyes met. Her rose lifted gently between them, small hands offering something pure in a world built on discipline and steel. "You already give me something better every day," he murmured. "But yes, you may." She placed the rose into his hand, like it was a medal, like she was knighting a knight long forgotten by the world. And for a moment, sunlight passed over his face, softening the hard edges life had carved there. Beneath the worn uniform and tired eyes was a man who had once been carved from fire and sky, someone who had once owned the horizon, not a mop. Somewhere near the landing strip, voices rose, officers conducting inspection, crisp and commanding. Emily leaned closer, whispering, "Are they the bosses?" Michael chuckled quietly. Something like that. She leaned into him, hugging his leg. It wasn't fear, just the instinct of a child sensing a moment heavier than she could name. A helicopter's rotor wash rippled across the deck, scattering loose dust. A young sailor hurried toward Michael holding a clipboard. "Sir, Carter," he stammered, cheeks pink. "The Admiral's inspection is starting. Just keep to the side, okay?" Michael nodded once. "Of course." The sailor hesitated, eyes flicking to Emily. "Cute kid," he said softly, almost apologetic. Then he jogged off, disappearing back into uniform symmetry. Michael stood quietly with Emily beside him, the kind of quiet where a man doesn't shrink, he simply chooses not to occupy more space than he needs. The kind of quiet that comes from knowing noise doesn't build legacy, character does. From across the deck, a commanding voice barked, "All hands prepare for Admiral's presence." The sailors straightened. Boots tightened into perfect rows. The air itself seemed to stand at attention. Emily whispered, "Should we stand like that too?" Michael smoothed her hair. "We stand exactly how we are. We are not pretending to be someone else today." Her whole face brightened at his words. To a child, being enough exactly as you are is a gift. To a man who had once been more than enough, then stripped of titles and ceremony, it was a vow. A line of decorated officers approached, medals gleaming. At their center strode a tall man in immaculate white, Admiral William Bradford, followed half a step behind by Admiral Grace Whitmore. Her posture, straight eyes observant, the kind of calm presence storms hesitate to cross. Bradford laughed loudly at something, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. Grace's gaze scanned the deck with quiet precision, like someone who saw more than protocol required. Michael didn't look at them directly. He didn't need to. He had once walked among men like them before the world titled a different direction beneath his feet. Emily tugged him again, a whisper full of wonder. "Daddy, are we supposed to salute?" He shook his head gently. "We honor people by how we treat them, not how high we raise our hands." She nodded, absorbing the lesson with the sincerity only a child can offer. As the admirals approached, the ship stilled. The hum of engines softened, replaced by a tension that comes before something unexpected happens, before the quiet part of life meets the loud one. And in that moment, Admiral Grace Whitmore's eyes brushed across Michael Carter, just a passing glance. But she paused. Brows lifted a fraction. Recognition wasn't there, but something else was. A flicker. A question she could not yet name. Michael held the rose Emily had given him. A red bloom, alone, in a world of steel and stripes. The gentle symbol of a life no one here knew he had earned 100 times over, not through violence, but through the choice to put it down. Emily looked up at him again, proud and innocent. "Daddy," she whispered, "you look like a hero." He didn't answer. Heroes he knew weren't the ones who claimed the title. They were the ones who walked the deck with a mop instead of medals, because somewhere along the way, they learned that peace is the greatest battlefield to win. And before the admirals reached him, before laughter and questions and history could breach the quiet, Michael simply stood there, holding his daughter's hand, holding her rose, and holding the kind of strength the world rarely applauds, the strength to live quietly after surviving loudly. The inspection line tightened as Admiral Bradford approached his white uniform, catching the morning sun like polished bone. Sailors stood, tall eyes forward, breath held, as though reverence alone kept the ocean still. Admiral Grace Whitmore followed just behind him, spine-straight presence, calm an anchor in the storm of military formality. Bradford's voice boomed, confident and careless in equal measure. "Fine discipline today, gentlemen. The Navy at its best." His laughter rolled across the deck, a performance meant to be seen and heard. Grace nodded to each sailor quietly, her manner different, respectful, thoughtful. She didn't need volume to command the air around her. Michael stood off to the side, Emily's small hand wrapped around his. She watched the admirals with awe. He watched them with the composure of someone who had once stood where they stood, then willingly walked away from everything they believed defined him. Bradford's gaze fell on him and paused. A janitor, on inspection day, with a mop bucket and a child, perfect bait for humor. He pointed at Michael, grin growing wide. "You there." Emily stiffened, half hiding behind her father's leg. Michael didn't flinch. Bradford strode closer, the crowd's attention snapping with him. "Tell me, Carter, isn't it?" He squinted at the name patch, not truly reading, just entertaining himself. "Yes, Carter. Be honest with us here. What's your kill count? I'm 6. Or just a few grease stains and a clogged toilet or 2. His voice rang loud, sailors chuckling out of instinct or fear of not joining in. Emily's brows knitted. She didn't fully understand, but she felt the sting. Her little hand gripped tighter. Grace's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes flashing sharply toward Bradford. "Admiral." But Michael lifted a hand slightly, not to salute, just to pause the world for a breath. He met Bradford's eyes. Not in challenge, in truth. 468, he said quietly, his voice steady as steel. But I stopped counting when I learned what staying alive meant for a little girl who needed a father, more than a country, needed another weapon. Silence crashed like a wave. The laughter died mid-breath. Sailors froze. Even the gulls seemed to stop midair. Emily looked up at him, puzzled, but proud. Grace stared, breath caught in her throat. Bradford's grin evaporated, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then a faint tremor of fear. Michael didn't blink, didn't posture. His words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield long gone, but never forgotten. Bradford barked a stiff laugh, too loud, too forced. "That's quite the imagination, Carter." Grace turned sharply. "Sir." But Michael gently shook his head, not contradicting, not defending, just choosing not to fight a battle that didn't matter. "I don't expect you to believe me," he said quietly, "and I don't need you to." Emily tugged his sleeve again, innocence shielding him from the moment's weight. "Daddy, what's a kill count?" Michael bent to her level voice, low, soft as a prayer, a number that never feels like pride, sweetheart. "Let's not talk about it." She nodded, trusting him completely. Grace's eyes shimmered, not with pity, but something deeper. Respect, empathy, grief for a man who carried wars in his silence. Bradford cleared his throat, suddenly finding great interest in the horizon. "Carry on." His voice cracked slightly. The inspection continued, but something had changed. Whispers rippled like wind through wheat. The Wraith. Could it be him? He was supposed to be dead. Rumors traveled faster than orders in military history, and Michael Carter's truth just detonated in the middle of a steel kingdom. Emily tugged his shirt again, softer now. "Did I do something wrong?" Michael knelt, cupping her cheeks. "You did everything right. Always." She touched the rose in his hand. "Then why is everyone looking?" He smiled, a tired warmth in his eyes. "Sometimes people stare when they see something they don't understand." Emily nodded again, as if filing away a secret grown-up lesson. Across the deck, Grace stepped away from the formation. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching him. This quiet man with a mop, holding a rose, as if it weighed more than any weapon he ever carried. Their eyes met across the waves of uniformed men. Not romance, yet. Recognition. Pain, meeting pain. Honor recognizing honor hidden beneath dirt and silence. Then the ship's intercom cracked alive. "All personnel stand by for exercise briefing." Life resumed in motion. Officers moved. Sailors marched the metal beast that was the carrier, exhaled purpose once more. But something stayed behind in the air, a fracture in the illusion of rank and ceremony. Michael rose, slowly lifting Emily into his arms. She wrapped around him instinctively, her cheek against his shoulder. "Daddy," she whispered. "Are you sad?" "No," he murmured, "just remembering." And as he carried his daughter toward the quiet end of the deck, away from the officers, away from whispers and eyes and questions, Grace Whitmore's voice echoed softly behind him, not spoken aloud, but breathed through the hush. "A man like that doesn't lie." And one day soon, the Navy would learn what the ocean already knew. Some legends don't vanish. They choose to fade, until the world forces them to rise again. Rumors travel strangely on a warship. Orders move with precision, following rank and protocol. But whispers slip through steel bulkheads, roll across the deck, and crawl into every corner faster than any command ever could. By noon, half the ship had heard the janitor's answer. 468. The number carried weight too precise to be a joke, too calm to be bravado. Men who had laughed earlier now whispered behind gloved hands. Young sailors shot quick, uneasy glances toward every maintenance locker, as if a ghost might be folding towels inside, waiting to be acknowledged. To them, he wasn't Michael Carter anymore. He had become the rumor. The Wraith, a name spoken so quietly it felt like superstition, a shadow from wars that had no official record and no public medal ceremonies. Some dismissed it as nonsense, but veterans, those with weathered eyes and medals that never felt heavy enough, they didn't laugh. They remembered stories whispered by pilots who flew higher and came home quieter. Stories of a man who guided an A-10 like it was part of him, carving through enemy lines, saving Americans pinned down in forgotten corners of the world. A ghost with wings. A phantom that only returned because a little girl waited on the ground for him. Just a myth until a janitor answered without flinching. Admiral Grace Whitmore sat in her office hours later, a file open on her desk, thick, classified with large red stripes, indicating past restrictions. She didn't normally dig into personnel like this, but something gnawed at her since that moment on the deck. Michael Carter. Once listed in the Air Combat Command. Status KIA classified operation. Her fingers traced the printed word, deceased, as though touching the lie might make it confess. How could a dead man walk her deck with a mop? How did his file list no awards, no service record beyond the bare minimum? Why was a man like that scrubbing floors? Grace exhaled slowly. She had dealt with political cover-ups before, quiet corruption, wearing medals and polished shoes. The military, like any human institution, had its shadows. But this felt different. This felt personal, even though she didn't yet know how. She pressed her intercom. "Captain Hale." "Report to my office." Moments later, Captain Ethan Hale entered, sharp, jaw, clean posture, the kind of young officer who still believed rules were tools for justice rather than shields for power. "You requested me, Admiral, close the door." He obeyed, face tightening with curiosity. Grace slid Michael's file toward him. "Tell me what you know about Carter." Hale read. His brows drew tight. "This file is incomplete." "Sanitized," she corrected softly. "Deliberately." Hale hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Rumors are circulating about what he said." "Are they just rumors?" Hale looked up, meeting her gaze. "Ma'am, I've heard the Wraith mentioned by special operations pilots. Not often, and never loud. The kind of story you hear once and don't repeat unless you trust the room. So you believe him?" Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "Do you?" Grace leaned back. "I believe sincerity when I hear it, and I believe pain when I see it." Silence stretched between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Two honorable people considering a truth the world wasn't supposed to know. Finally, Hale spoke again. If he is who they say he is, someone made him disappear. Someone powerful, Grace murmured. Someone afraid of the truth. A shadow crossed Hale's face. We should tread carefully. She nodded. Yes, carefully but forward. Outside the office, life continued. Boots on metal drills called over speakers, the rhythm of Navy duty. But inside, two minds turned toward a mystery, shaped like a humble man holding a child's hand. Meanwhile, on the lower deck, Michael quietly wiped down a corridor rail, while Emily sat cross-legged nearby, coloring in a notebook. Other janitors passed with nods, some respectful, now some confused others, unsure how to treat someone who might be more than he appeared. Emily hummed gently, blissfully, unbothered by the weight that now followed her father like a second shadow. She lifted her drawing proudly. "Daddy, look, it's us on the boat, and you're flying too." Michael knelt beside her. The drawing showed him sweeping the deck with one hand and piloting an airplane with the other, a child's perfect blend of truth and imagination. Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them back. "That's beautiful," he whispered. "You made Daddy look very brave." "You were brave." She tapped the airplane. "And you still have wings. You just don't use them right now. Kids saw things adults missed, maybe because they weren't taught yet what they were not supposed to see." Michael brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop fighting, and be a daddy instead." He nodded. Exactly that. Emily smiled proud as a soldier pinning on her first badge. At that moment, Grace walked by. She froze, not because she needed to speak, but because the sight hit her in a place rank could never reach. Michael kneeling beside his daughter, the rose from earlier resting beside his bucket. A warrior disguised as a custodian, teaching gentleness in a world built on force. Emily looked up. High Lady Admiral Grace's stern expression melted. "Hello, Emily." Michael stood, protective instinct subtle but present. He didn't salute. She didn't expect him to. Their eyes met again. No uniform could mask the questions between them. "Mr. Carter," Grace said softly, "I may need to speak with you soon." "Of course, Admiral," he replied. "But not today. Today is her day." Grace nodded. She understood. And for the first time in a long time, she envied a man not for power or rank, but for peace. As she walked away, a thought followed her like a quiet drumbeat. Heroes don't always rise. Some bow so their children can stand. And somewhere in the ship's command tower, a high-level encrypted message flashed to life, sent from an office that feared ghosts and hated witnesses. Subject Carter confirmed alive. Initiate containment. The doors of silence had opened. What came through them would not be gentle. Dusk settled over the carrier like a blessing and a farewell, the sky melting from gold to ember, then to a hush of violet. The flight deck, so full of metal noise and duty by day, softened into something almost gentle. Sea winds carried the scent of salt and possibility, cooling steel and stirring flags that still held the day's pride. It was the hour when discipline loosened, when even soldiers felt allowed to exhale. Michael and Emily stood along the starboard rail, where the water below glimmered in slow, rhythmic breaths. Emily leaned on the railing, kicking her heels in contentment. She held a new rose picked from the small garden that the ship's cook tended on the aft deck. Only a handful knew it existed. Fewer still knew Emily had been invited there by the chef himself. "Daddy," she whispered, holding the flower to her cheek as though roses were meant to be hugged. "Do you think roses get lonely?" "Maybe," Michael murmured, adjusting her little jacket as the wind brushed stronger. But if they do, they don't complain. They just keep blooming. Like you, Michael smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I just try to show up for the people who matter. Emily nodded in her serious 6-year-old way. That's blooming. He kissed the top of her head. You make it easy. From across the deck, unseen by Emily, but not by Michael. Admiral Grace. Whitmore watched the moment. She hadn't followed them. She simply happened to be walking the evening rounds, a habit she had carried since her first command post. But her steps slowed, as though the deck itself urged her to witness instead of command. Michael lifted Emily, settling her on the rail, where her legs dangled safely inside his arm. She held the rose out to the wind, as though gifting the ocean its color. "Daddy," she whispered again. Why do roses have thorns if they're supposed to be pretty? He considered the question. To remind people that beauty can be strong, and strength can be gentle. That sounds like a story, she said dreamily. It is, he murmured. One I'm still learning. It was then Grace stepped closer, not intruding, not official, just a person drawn toward a truth she could not ignore. "Evening, Mr. Carter," she greeted, voice low enough not to disturb the child. Michael turned, nodding with the respectful ease that came not from hierarchy, but from being raised right. "Admiral." Emily waved the rose at her. "Look, mine bloomed today." Grace smiled genuinely. "It's beautiful, just like its owner." Emily beamed, then whispered conspiratorially, "Daddy says, life is like roses. You have to hold the soft part, not the thorn." Grace's eyes lifted to Michael's. He sounds like a smart man. Sometimes, Michael said softly, brushing Emily's hair back. Emily yawned, big and sincere. She rested her head on Michael's shoulder, the rose still pinched between her fingers. Childhood exhaustion wrapped around her like a gentle blanket. Grace's gaze rested on the little girl, then returned to the man holding her. "She's lucky," Grace said quietly, "to grow up loved like that." Michael didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the horizon where the last strip of sun was drowning in the sea, like memories meant to fade, but refusing to. "Love isn't complicated," he finally said. "It just requires courage and sacrifice." Grace inhaled the weight of those words settling somewhere deep. "And sometimes silence," she murmured, studying him. "You carry a lot of it. It's lighter than regret," he replied. For a moment, neither spoke. The ocean did in its endless language, soft, eternal. "I looked into your record," Grace admitted quietly. "Not as an accusation, but as a confession." Michael didn't stiffen. He simply rested his chin lightly against Emily's hair. "And what did you find?" "Nothing," she said, which means everything. Silence again, this one heavier. He turned slightly so Emily wouldn't hear. "Some truths aren't safe to speak," he said. "Not yet." Grace's voice softened into something almost human, stripped of rank. "It must be lonely." Michael's eyes stayed on the water. "Lonely is when you have no one to fight for." "I don't have that problem." Grace followed his gaze to the sleeping child in his arms. Warmth flickered through her chest, admiration, sorrow, longing for something she couldn't name. "Does she know?" Grace asked. "Not the shadows," Michael replied. "Just the light." "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you know peace?" He swallowed. "I know moments that look like it. That's enough." Grace nodded. And in that nod was a prayer, though neither named it. Emily murmured in her sleep, curling closer. Michael shifted her weight without a thought, without effort, as natural as breath. The act made Grace's throat tighten. "War takes from people," she whispered. "It rarely gives them anything back." Michael finally looked at her. The wind moved hair across his brow, The last dusky glow framed him like a reluctant portrait. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "It gave me her." Grace's breath caught. He continued barely above a whisper, and it gave me the lesson to never waste peace. The ship horn echoed in the distance, signaling evening shift change. Sailors moved again, voices rising in routine. But in that pocket of deck, time had slowed. 2 lives, pain-tempered, duty-worn, stood suspended between what was and what might have been. Grace spoke last voice, soft as silk, worn from years of wear. "There are men who win wars," she said, "and there are men who survive them. Those aren't always the same." Michael nodded once the tiniest admission. And sometimes, she added, those who survive quietly are the ones we owe the most. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His eyes held a gratitude deeper than thanks, and a sorrow wider than sea. Grace stepped back, unwilling to intrude further. "Good night, Mr. Carter." "Good night, Admiral." Emily stirred, whispering. "Daddy?" Did the rose like the ocean? Michael kissed her forehead. I think it admired the view. Grace turned away, but not before she saw it, the look on his face when he thought no one was watching. Not regret, not pain, but hope. Carefully held like the stem of a flower with thorns. A hope neither uniform nor fate had managed to take. Night draped over the carrier like a velvet curtain, swallowing the last traces of sunlight and replacing them with a sky pricked by stars. Down in the ship's lower corridors, lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, enough to guide footsteps, not enough to chase loneliness. Michael walked with Emily in his arms, her breathing slow and even against his shoulder. The hum of engines beneath them pulsed like a giant heartbeat. Duty never slept on a ship like this. But tonight, something else didn't sleep either. Fear. Not for himself, he had lived through places where fear was a waking companion and death a familiar shadow. Know what tightened inside him was quieter, sharper. Fear for his daughter. Old instincts stirred. He could sense change before he could describe it. Peace was shifting, and peace he knew only shifted when violence moved beneath the surface. On the other side of the world, in a fortified office, thick with metals, mahogany, and ego, General Cole Stanton stared at a screen displaying a single message: "Carter alive. Confirmed." His hand trembled not from fear, but fury. The kind of fury that rises when a ghost refuses to stay buried. How he growled. A nervous intelligence officer shifted. Satellite patch glitch. Routine carrier log. Flagged the name. Then a witness report. Someone overheard a number, sir. 468, Stanton whispered bitterly. He would say it. The boy never did learn how to lie convincingly. The officer swallowed. "Sir, what are your orders?" Stanton leaned back, the leather creaking under the weight of decades of polished power. His jaw tightened, eyes hardened. "Containment," he said, coldly. "Quiet. No mistakes this time." A man like Carter dies in silence. He clasped his hands, knuckles pale. And ensure the Navy never knows what he truly was. The officer nodded, leaving like a man running from a storm. Stanton stared at the dark window, seeing not his reflection, but a desert sky burning and the silhouette of an A-10 diving like judgment. Should have made sure he muttered. Should have watched him die. Back on the carrier, Grace Whitmore stood on the bridge reviewing night shift reports. But her focus slipped, returning again and again to one image: Michael on the deck, holding his daughter, holding a rose, like a memory instead of a flower. "Admiral Whitmore," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Captain Ethan Hale, his expression troubled. "I intercepted a communication through classified channels," he whispered. It referenced Carter. "Code urgent containment." Grace's back stiffened. Where did it originate? Army intelligence. Upper echelon. Hale hesitated. General Stanton's office. Grace's pulse slowed. Anger never sped her up. It sharpened her. And what do you think it means? Hale looked at her, the way a student looks at a trusted mentor searching for wisdom, but already fearing the truth. Someone wants him gone, he murmured. Again. Grace lowered her gaze. They failed once. People like Stanton don't tolerate failures. She straightened voice, steady but shaking inside. This isn't about one man's reputation, she said. This is about the military's soul. If we allow a hero to be erased to protect ego, what do we become? Hale exhaled. What do we do? Grace's voice dropped to steel, wrapped in silk. We protect what serves honor, not what hides it. Hale nodded. Then first we warn him. She looked out over the dark ocean. He already knows. Men like him feel danger before it announces itself. Michael reached his small cabin and laid Emily gently on the cot. She curled instinctively toward his hand, even in sleep her fingers catching his sleeve. "Daddy," she murmured. "Stay." "I will," he whispered. "Always." But in his chest, old reflexes were returning, scanning corners, mapping exits without thinking. A soldier never fully unlearned survival. He simply chooses where to aim it. He kissed Emily's forehead and stepped into the hall, just far enough not to disturb her, just close enough to return within a heartbeat. A mechanic passed, offering a nod. A junior officer saluted out of habit, before catching himself saluting a janitor. He flushed, confused by his own instinct. Michael didn't notice. His senses were tuned elsewhere. He paused near a maintenance hatch, leaning casually as if resting. In reality, he listened. Every vibration, every shift in air pressure, every distant footstep. Something foreign was on this ship tonight, a presence that didn't walk like a sailor, didn't breathe like one, didn't belong. Michael lowered his hand to his side, subtle quiet, a movement honed by years of ambushes and dark corridors in foreign lands. Then he heard it. A faint scrape down the hall. Too controlled to be accidental, too intentional to be routine. He didn't tense. Tension is loud. He simply shifted slightly, placing himself between the sound and the cabin where his daughter slept. The air held its breath with him. He waited. Silent. Still. Predator. Not prey. A shadow lingered outside the light, watching, measuring. Michael spoke without raising his voice. "If you touch that door," he said calmly, "you will not leave this ship." The shadow froze. For a second, only the hum of the engines answered. Then soft metal whispered someone slipping away into the dark, retreating, not defeated, but warned. Michael didn't pursue. He didn't need to. Predators only retreat from stronger predators. And whoever sent that man would now know Michael Carter was not a janitor who could be quietly erased. He was a father. And a father protecting his child is a force even governments fear. He exhaled. The danger wasn't gone, only delayed. Returning to Emily, he sat beside her, fingers brushing her hair gently. She sighed in comfort. He looked at the sealing voice, a breath I walked away to give her peace. Don't take that from me. Below decks, the ship groaned forward through night waters, carrying soldiers' secrets, and one man who had once been a legend and was becoming one again against his will. Peace had been a choice. War would now be a response. And somewhere above, Grace Whitmore stood watching the horizon, whispering to the sea. "Hold your ground, Michael. Some battles find us whether we want them or not." Morning returned slowly, as though the sea hesitated to wake what the night had stirred. In the small cabin, Emily slept, curled beneath her blanket hand, tucked beneath her cheek, like she'd fallen asleep mid-dream. Michael watched her breathe before finally rising. The threat from last night hadn't left him. It hovered silent as the ocean mist outside. Danger had once been an external thing, a shape, a sound, a target. Now it was a question sitting in the back of his skull. Can I keep her safe again? He brushed Emily's hair from her forehead, whispering a promise only broken men ever make completely. I won't lose you too. He stepped outside quietly, not to leave her, but to think, to breathe, to feel the air before it filled with commands and noise. On the upper deck, the world stretched wide steel runway yawning ocean, and the kind of sunrise that painted hope even on days that didn't deserve it. A familiar voice broke the stillness. Mr. Carter. He turned. Admiral Grace Whitmore stood a few paces away, hands behind her back. Hair tugged gently by the wind. She didn't wear the stiff superiority of rank this morning. Instead, she carried something softer. A question. A responsibility. Admiral. He nodded. You sensed it last night, didn't you? She asked. Someone was on this ship who shouldn't be. His jaw flexed. Sensed? No. I knew. And you didn't report it. He looked toward the ocean instead of her. Some truths don't survive paperwork, and some monsters don't fear it. Grace took a measured breath. Walk with me. He hesitated, then followed. They moved along the deck in silence for several long moments. Not uncomfortable, simply quiet the way two people walk when something heavy waits to be spoken. Captain Hale told me Stanton is involved, she said. You know why? Michael didn't answer at first. He let the wind speak for him. When he finally did, his voice wasn't angry. Anger was loud. This was something older, quieter. A scar. He needed a hero erased, Michael said. So he killed one on paper and tried to make it real. Grace stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Why you? Because I wouldn't carry out something that would have traded innocent lives for political advantage. His voice was steady, but the memory behind it trembled. There was a covert op, intelligence compromised, civilians caught in the middle. And you refused orders, she asked gently. I refused a massacre dressed as strategy. His gaze hardened, not proud, but anchored. I flew anyway, not to complete the operation, but to stop it. And you saved civilians. I saved Americans, he corrected softly. And 2 Allied pilots who never should have been sent in blind. And your wife, Grace started, voice lowering. He swallowed once, jaw clenching. She was waiting for me at home. Emily was barely learning to say daddy. Grace saw it, the fracture running through him. The wound time hadn't fully closed. When I got back, he continued. Stanton had already labeled me rogue, inscribed my name among the dead, declared me a liability, a ghost. And you didn't fight it. I could have fought. Could have torn down careers if I aired what I knew. But then I looked at her. His voice broke not in volume, but in warmth. And I realized the battlefield wasn't out there anymore. It was right here. His hand touched his chest, then lowered, as though remembering a weight he once carried there. I traded my wings for a lunchbox and small hands that needed to feel safe. Grace exhaled, shaken by how simple and monumental the truth was. So you became invisible, she whispered. I became a father, he corrected. Men like Stanton can kill soldiers. They can't kill fathers. Wind swept past them, rustling flag and soul alike. Grace's throat tightened. You walked away from everything you earned. No, Michael said softly. I carried the only thing that mattered with me. Grace's eyes glimmered. Admiration, reverence, sorrow, a dangerous tenderness. Does she know what her father gave up? She just knows I love her. That's enough. And what about you? Grace asked quietly. Do you ever wish you'd stayed in the sky? He didn't hesitate. I come from a place where every wish had a cost. I paid mine. Peace isn't always wings. Sometimes it's a broom or a bedtime story. Grace's composure, wavered voice, unsteady not from rank, but humanity. You miss your wife? He closed his eyes briefly. Every dawn, every bedtime, every time Emily laughs like her. She swallowed. Emotions collected behind her ribs. What happened to her? Wrong place. Wrong time. The kind of tragedy the news scrolls past. His voice cracked, then steadied. I learned then that a man can avenge, or he can raise a child. He can't do both well. Grace looked away because looking at him then would have exposed too much of her own soul. When she spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. Michael, you didn't choose to disappear. You chose love over legacy. No, he replied softly. Legacy is what she grows up to be. A silence heavier than a salute settled between them. Reverence. Not ceremony, soul. I won't let anything happen to her. Grace said, suddenly, conviction threading her voice like steel. Or to you. He shook his head gently. Protection invites conflict. I just need time. And quiet. You deserve more than that. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, fragile, forbidden, and honest. Deserve, Michael murmured. Maybe. But needing her was always greater than needing justice. Grace's heart clenched, not for herself, but for him, for the life he carried carefully like the rose Emily gave him that morning. Soft petals over quiet thorns. She took one half-step toward him, then stopped, not from fear, but respect. The kind of respect rare even between officers. What now? She whispered. We wait, he said. I don't run. I don't hide. But I will not start a war unless it reaches my door. Grace nodded, but her eyes hardened, not cruel, but fierce. And if it does reach your door, he looked toward the sea, then back at her. Quiet and unshakable. Then someone will learn I stopped killing by choice, he said. Not weakness. A chill carved through the wind, not violence, but inevitability. Grace stood taller, not as an admiral, but as a witness to a truth few ever earned the right to see. You didn't fall, she whispered. You landed where you were needed. Michael said nothing. He just let the sea carry her words like a benediction. And somewhere deep in the ship's belly, an enemy agent checked his weapon again. The world hadn't finished with Michael Carter, but neither had his peace. Night again. The carrier breathed under the stars, a steel cathedral floating in endless black water. The moon cast long silver lines across the deck, turning walkways into corridors of ghost light. Machinery hummed low, the mechanical heartbeat of a nation at sea. Most souls aboard slept. The ones who didn't were either on duty or hunting in silence. Michael walked the lower deck alone, having finally lulled Emily to sleep with a story about clouds that turned into angels to watch over little girls. She'd drifted off, clutching a small rose petal she'd kept like treasure. He moved with trained stillness, his hands loose, his steps, quiet not from fear, but instinct. Peace was a discipline, not a default, and tonight, peace felt borrowed. A hushed scrape echoed behind him, barely audible, a sound most men would mistake as pipes cooling. Michael didn't turn. Predators reveal themselves quickest when prey refuses to play the part. He paused at a junction, adjusting a loose glove in a gesture so ordinary it bordered on flawless disguise. There, a shadow flickered. Not just a person. A presence. Michael didn't stiffen. He simply slid a mop bucket aside with one hand, stepping into shadow as though he belonged to it. A figure approached, dressed in maintenance overalls, but the posture was wrong. Too rigid. Too cautious. Boots too clean. Shoulders too squared. Cold eyes searching, not working. The agent paused near the crew ladder. Slow listening. Michael waited, breath whisper thin. His heartbeat didn't change. It never did at moments like this. The calm wasn't trained, it was earned. The agent lifted a suppressed weapon. Michael moved first. No sound. No warning, He stepped out of darkness like it opened to release him, one hand snapping the man's wrist, the other striking the elbow joint with surgical precision. The gun dropped, clattering dull against metal. The agent hissed in pain, but didn't shout professional. Dangerous. He lunged with a blade pulled from his sleeve, sweeping upward toward Michael's ribs. Michael shifted his weight, letting the strike pass, then trapped the attacker's arm and used his momentum to pin him against the bulkhead. Quick. Efficient. Not flashy necessary. Wrong ship, Michael murmured. The man's breath snarled. You should have stayed dead. A lot of people feel that way, Michael answered quietly. The agent tried to reach for another weapon. Michael blocked, twisted and disarmed him in one fluid motion. The knife skittered across steel. Who sent you? Michael asked softly. Not for himself, but to confirm the enemy. The agent smirked despite the chokehold. Everybody knows what happens to ghosts when the living need convenience. Michael's jaw tightened. Tell General Stanton I don't run. The man's eyes widened, surprised Michael already knew. Then footsteps sounded light, measured, disciplined. Admiral Grace Whitmore emerged from the shadows, drawn by instinct or fate. She stopped at the sight, two men in locked violence, one held effortlessly by a man the Navy thought swept floors. She didn't speak at first. Her breath caught not from fear, but from realization. She had thought she understood who he was. She hadn't begun to. Michael barely glanced at her. Admiral. His voice was calm, but his stance stayed planted protective, half shielding her presence, half ensuring the enemy couldn't see vulnerability in him. Grace stepped forward. Release him. Michael obeyed, but not fully. He let the man drop only to his knees, one hand still controlling. Enough restraint to show respect for her authority. Enough hold to ensure her safety. Who are you? Grace demanded, voice low but controlled. The intruder coughed, smirking blood. Nobody you'll ever report. Paper trails don't exist for men like me. His tone turned, mocking eyes flicking toward Michael. Or him. Michael didn't react. Emotion at times like this was a luxury. Grace motioned for security, but Michael shook his head subtly. Quietly, he murmured, "This isn't Navy protocol. It's cleanup." Grace studied him, really looked. The calm, the discipline, the lethal efficiency wrapped in humility. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't killed. He neutralized and waited. A man who once ended lives now restrained violence, like it was a burden he refused to pick up again. Grace spoke softly, without looking away from him. "Are there more?" one Michael replied. "Maybe two. They'll try again when they believe opportunity outweighs risk. And you," her voice carried something unspoken, "you'll face them alone again." "This isn't their battlefield," he said. "This ship has enough warriors. I just need to keep her safe." Grace heard the truth beneath it. "I don't kill unless I must, but I will not let danger near my child, or near those who still believe in honor." Security arrived quietly, taking the agent without reportable noise. Grace gave orders in a whisper, her authority sharp enough to slice steel her composure carved from duty. When they left, the corridor fell still again. Only then did she speak. "You could have killed him." Michael's gaze stayed on the floor. "I don't do that anymore. And if he came for your daughter?" His eyes lifted. Calm. Steady. "I don't do that anymore," he repeated softly. "But I would." Grace felt the words hit her chest like confession and vow combined. She looked at him, not as a superior officer, not as an investigator, but as a woman confronted by the rarest kind of strength, not the power to take life. The discipline not to despite the ability. "You saved lives tonight," she whispered. "I protected peace," he corrected. "There's a difference." She nodded. A delicate ache rose in her throat. Respect. Pain. Something dangerously close to tenderness. Rest, she told him. I don't rest when she's here, he replied quietly. Rest is a luxury for safe worlds. Grace hesitated. I'll increase security. He shook his head gently. That will draw suspicion before it prevents danger. Let them think the ship slept tonight. The soft light flickered over his face. Features worn not by age, but by endurance. A man who had lived more life than most armies. Michael, she whispered. His name fell like a confession. No one should bear this alone. He offered a faint, weary smile. Admiral, the day a soldier stops bearing what must be borne is the day we stop deserving peace. She didn't argue. Couldn't. There was truth there, she felt, but couldn't articulate. As he turned to return to Emily, Grace called softly after him. Your daughter is blessed. But this nation owes you too, even if it doesn't know it. Michael paused. The ship hummed. The sea breathed. I don't need a nation to owe me, he murmured. I just need her to sleep without fear. Grace watched him walk away into the dim hall, a father in worn boots, carrying invisible metals heavier than steel. And she whispered to the empty corridor, You may fear war, Michael, but war fears men like you. Morning aboard the carrier usually felt like discipline, boots hitting steel whistles, slicing the air orders, echoing like hymns in a floating chapel of duty. But this morning was different. Something heavy trembled beneath the routine. The air felt tighter. Conversations lowered as officers passed. Rumor had hardened into suspicion, and suspicion in a place built to enforce order demanded process. Michael Carter stood alone inside a small conference room, 4 metal walls, a single table, a humming overhead light. Not a courtroom, just a room. But the silence felt more binding than any judge's bench. Emily was safe in the nursery, 2 decks up, coloring roses with crayons. Michael could still feel the memory of her tiny hand squeezing his that morning. Daddy, you coming back for lunch, always he'd answered. It wasn't a promise, it was a vow. The door clicked. Admiral Grace Whitmore entered first, face composed uniform. Sharp, but eyes human. Captain Ethan Hale followed, jaw-clenched, protective tension radiating off him. 2 JAG officers stepped in behind them, badges gleaming the law walking with polite steel. Grace didn't sit. Neither did Michael. Some truths didn't deserve chairs. Mr. Carter, the senior JAG officer, began, voice formal. You have been brought here for an internal review regarding an unauthorized confrontation aboard naval property. Michael's hands rested loosely at his sides. Not defensive, not submissive. Simply present. Hale cleared his throat. We are not pressing charges. We are clarifying protocol. The euphemism floated like dust in sunlight. Grace's voice entered quietly. In plain words, someone encountered you in the dark last night and left in restraints. We need to understand. Your need to understand, Michael said gently, is reasonable. The senior JAG officer blinked, surprised by the calm. He expected anger, maybe panic. But Michael had outlived panic, outweighed anger. He lived in the space beyond them. Please recount the incident, Grace asked, not as command, but request. Michael nodded. A man approached the berthing corridor near my daughter's quarters. He carried a suppressed firearm. His posture and movement indicated training, special forces level unfamiliar with the ship's rhythm. And you engaged, the JAG officer said. Pen ready. I neutralized, Michael corrected. Engagement implies ego. Fear. I had neither. The officers exchanged glances. You didn't report to command immediately after one asked. No. The truth sat simple, unadorned. Noise would have woken my daughter. and chaos invites escalation. Hale exhaled sharply. That answer only a father who had known helplessness spoke that way. Grace held Michael's gaze. She saw it now, not as myth, but as marrow. He didn't avoid paperwork. He avoided trauma for a child. "Who do you believe sent the intruder?" the junior JAG officer asked. Michael didn't blink. "General Cole Stanton." Pennons froze. Even ocean noise outside seemed to hush. "You have proof?" the officer pressed. "Proof belongs to people who need to be believed," Michael said softly. "I only need to keep my daughter safe." Silence thudded. Heavy. Reverent. Grace's voice dropped lower than rank ever allowed. "You shouldn't face this alone." Michael lifted his eyes soft, but immovable. "I walked battlefields with men who had my back. I walk fatherhood with the memory of a woman who gave me her last breath. Alone is not a burden. It is a discipline." Even the JAG officers swallowed. Grace stepped closer, palms braced on the table, not dominating, but grounding herself. "Michael, they will come again. I know. And you would remain silent until silence endangers others," he responded. "Silence isn't weakness. It's choosing not to roar unless it saves someone." Hale rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Stanton won't let this go. You know that." Michael gave the faintest nod. "That is his burden." "Mine is a little girl who deserves to see sunrise without knowing what men do in shadows." Grace's composure cracked only slightly, only for a breath. "You shouldn't have to choose between raising your child and defending your life." "I don't," he replied. "I choose her. Every time." The room breathed with him, and in the quiet, Michael Carter didn't feel like a janitor or ghost soldier or myth. He felt like a father standing trial for loving too fiercely. Grace finally spoke again, voice steady with decision. "From this moment you are under my protection. That is not a request. It is a duty I choose." Michael's jaw tightened, but eyes gentled. "Protection paints targets on people. I won't let danger follow you." She shook her head. "I do not protect you because you need it. I protect you because truth deserves allies." He exhaled slowly. "Admiral, you owe me nothing." She answered quietly. "I owe honor everything." Hale leaned forward. "Let us do our jobs. Let us carry part of this burden." Michael met his gaze with quiet gratitude. "Burden is not mine. Responsibility is." Grace opened her mouth to protest but stopped. His resolve wasn't challenge. It was faith in a path only he could walk. JAG dismissed the review not as mercy but respect. Case closed pending further security inquiry. Michael turned to leave. Grace reached out not to stop him, but because her heart moved before protocol. Her fingers brushed his wrist. A touch small as breath, electric as truth. "Let me fight for you," she whispered. He paused, voice rough with something ancient and sacred. "You already do, in how you see me." Her eyes shone not with romance, but with recognition deeper than affection. He stepped back. "I can't let her see me in chains, even if the chains are justice." Grace nodded reluctantly. "Then you walk free here. Not because you are harmless, but because you choose to be." As he left the room, Hale exhaled a single sentence under his breath. "Men like him shouldn't clean floors. They should teach us how to live." Grace didn't answer. She watched Michael walk away, not glorified, not broken, simply steady. A man who didn't need medals. A man who carried peace like a shield. And she whispered, barely audible, "I won't let history erase you again." Michael didn't turn, but his step softened, as though for the first time in years, he believed someone might keep pace with his silence. Dawn returned with a quiet dignity, brushing the carrier's steel spine in pale gold. The sea below rolled like a restless memory, and for the first time in days, the ship felt expectant, as though the ocean itself waited to witness something long overdue. Michael walked the lower deck holding Emily's hand. Her small footsteps skipped beside his braiding innocence into a world built by uniform and burden. She held a rose again. Always a rose. "Daddy," she said between tiny hops, "do you like my drawing?" She unfolded a crinkled page, 2 figures holding hands. A woman in uniform, a man in work clothes, and a child between them smiling beneath a sunrise. "That's Admiral Lady Emily," said proudly. "She protects us." Michael paused. A soft ache filled his chest. Not pain, something like humility. "Yes," he answered gently. "She does. And this is you," she pointed, "and this is me. We're safe because the sky watches." He blinked, voice threading thin. "That's beautiful." Emily beamed. "I like drawings where people are safe." He kissed her hair. "Me too." Footsteps echoed behind them. Captain Ethan Hale appeared, face serious, eyes bright with urgency. "Mr. Carter," he called, slowing his pace as he approached, not wanting to startle the child. Michael turned. "Captain." Emily greeted him with a wave. "Hi, Mr. Smile Soldier." Hale almost laughed. It startled him joy on a deck that had forgotten the sound. "Good morning, Miss Emily." Then his tone shifted. "Michael, someone arrived for you." Michael's jaw tightened faintly. "Stanton's men again." "No," Hale said. "Someone who remembers." Emily tugged Michael's hand. "Can I come?" He knelt to her. "You'll stay here with Captain Hale. I'll only be a minute." Emily puffed her cheeks. "Only one. Maybe 2, he smiled. "Protect the captain while I'm gone." She saluted dramatically. Hale saluted back, solemnly matching her play. Michael followed Hale. They walked through echoing corridors, passing sailors, who attempted not to stare, some out of curiosity, others out of dawning recognition. The kind one feels when witnessing quiet greatness they weren't taught to expect. Finally, they arrived at a briefing room. Hale opened the door and stepped aside. Inside stood a broad-shouldered man in civilian clothes, hair graying at the temples' eyes, carved by years of service and sorrow. He turned when he sensed movement. "Carter." He breathed. Michael stopped. Then slowly he nodded. "Marcus." Chief Marcus Doyle crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled Michael into an embrace. Not a soldier's handshake, not a stiff greeting. A brother reclaiming a brother from a grave the world had dug too soon. Michael's breath left him surprised, but his arms lifted to return the gesture. Their grips weren't strong from force. They were strong from history. "You died," Doyle whispered, voice cracking. "I buried your name in my heart and kept walking, but I never believed it. Not once." Michael's jaw tightened. "I didn't die. I disappeared." "You weren't supposed to," Doyle said, pulling back to study him. "They stole your wings, Mike. They stole your story." Michael glanced toward the door, as if sensing Emily through steel. "I gave them away." Doyle shook his head. "No. You gave the sky away to raise a child. There's no medal big enough to honor that." Hale stayed quietly near the wall, not wanting to intrude on something sacred. Marcus stepped back, reaching into a folder. "I brought proof. Records they tried to scrub. Mission telemetry, encrypted comm logs, eyewitness statements. Names of men who lived because you disobeyed death to save them." He swallowed. "I kept it all. Not because I thought you needed vindication, but because truth deserved a witness." Michael didn't reach for the documents. He looked tired. Not weak, simply full like a heart too worn to carry pride. "I don't want revenge," Michael said quietly. "This isn't revenge," Doyle answered. "It's restoration." The door opened again. Admiral Grace Whitmore entered her presence, soft but commanding. She saw Doyle and nodded once respect, exchanged without introduction. Admiral Doyle greeted. "You've been watching over him. I've been honoring what this Navy owes," she answered. Michael exhaled. "All I want is to leave this ship when my daughter is ready. Without handcuffs, without ghosts." Doyle's jaw locked. "You won't leave in chains. You'll leave with your name back." Michael shook his head. "My name belongs to Emily now. I made peace with that." Grace stepped closer. "Peace is not erasure. A man can be humble and still deserve truth." Michael's voice lowered. "Truth ruined my life once," Doyle answered softly. "No, Mike. Men did." Silence held them all, heavy, holy. Then faint stomps outside. Not rushed, not chaotic. Respectful. The door remained open just enough to see sailor after sailor rise from benches in the hallway, straightening uniforms silently. Not ordered, not commanded. Witnessing, Emily's small voice echoed faintly from behind them, cheerful and unaware. "Hi everyone, I'm protecting the captain." Soft chuckles broke the tension. Hardened sailors smiled at her, then returned solemn gazes to Michael as he stepped into view. One by one, without word or signal, sailors placed their hands behind their backs and stood at attention. A janitor had not walked past them. A warrior had, not decorated with medals, decorated with humility. Grace's voice broke the hush, gentle as prayer they know. Michael swallowed. "I never asked for this." "No," Doyle said. "You earned it." Hale leaned in. "Truth doesn't drag you forward, Michael. It waits patiently until you're ready to walk with it again." Emily ran to him, then holding her coloring book up high. "Daddy, I made you and Admiral Lady and roses." "We all have wings." Michael crouched, lifting her into his arms. Sailors, who might one day command ships, softened like men seeing a promise they lost long ago. She touched his cheek. "Why is everybody quiet? Did I draw something silly?" Michael pressed his forehead to hers. "No, Angel. You drew something true." Doyle placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, voice thick. The Navy buried a ghost. They didn't expect a father to return instead. Grace watched, eyes glimmering, not pride, but reverence. Michael stood, daughter in arms, surrounded by silent salutes, not yet raised, but felt. And as they walked through the passageway, sailors stepped aside. No horns, no commands, no ceremony. Only respect. Only light. Only truth, rising like the sun after too long a night. Emily waved her rose at them. High Navy friends, they stood taller. War had tried to erase a man. Peace was restoring him not with thunder, but with quiet footsteps, a child's drawing, and the stillness that follows, honor finally recognized. There are moments in life when even the ocean seems to hold its breath. This morning the carrier woke under such a silence. The wind was gentle, respectful. Boots sounded softer against metal. Even the gulls circled quietly, as if aware that something sacred hung in the air. Michael stood at the edge of the flight deck, Emily's hand folded inside his. The sun was only beginning to climb, painting their shadows long across the steel. Emily's little backpack was slung over her shoulder, crayon drawings peeking from the zipper like promises of a world far from war. It was time. Not because anyone forced him, not because fear drove him, but because peace, when earned and fragile, must sometimes be carried away before the world remembers how to stain it again. Michael had asked for no ceremony, no salute, no announcement. He simply requested clearance to depart with Emily at first light. Grace had granted it, but she had not accepted it. Footsteps approached a quiet rhythm that did not belong to marching sailors, but to someone who walked the line between command and care. Admiral Grace Whitmore joined him at the railing. Her hat tucked under one arm, morning wind teasing a loose strand of hair across her cheek. She looked as she rarely allowed herself to look, not invincible, not carved from command, but human. A woman standing face to face with goodbye. Emily, blissfully unaware of the weight around her, smiled brightly. "Good morning." Admiral Lady Grace knelt so she was eye level with the child. "Good morning, Emily." Her voice gentled in a way sailors never heard. "Are you ready for new adventures?" Emily nodded. Hard, ponytail, bobbing. "Daddy said we're going where roses grow bigger than my hand." Grace smiled. "Then the world doesn't know how lucky it is yet." Emily beamed, twirled her rose, and wandered a few feet away, close enough for safety. Far enough to give adults space they didn't ask for, but needed. Grace rose, turning toward Michael. "You could stay," she said softly. "We could protect you now." Michael took a deep breath, staring out over the endless water. "Protection and peace aren't the same thing." "You don't trust us?" she asked. No accusation, just sorrow. "I don't trust the world to leave you unharmed for standing beside me." Grace looked down the truth, striking harder than denial ever could. When she lifted her gaze again, it held steel and rain at once. "You don't have to face the past alone." "I'm not." He looked toward Emily. "She walks with me. Everything else I can weather." Grace inhaled slow and steady. "If you walked into my office and asked for reinstatement," he shook his head gently, "the sky doesn't need me anymore, and Emily needs someone who comes home every night, not someone whose picture hangs in a hallway." A long silence. The only movement was the rose petal brushing Emily's cheek in the breeze. Grace's voice softened to a tremor she hated and cherished at the same time. "And what about you? Who brings you home?" Michael's eyes drifted toward the horizon. "I don't need home. I build it. One small hand at a time." For a long moment, Grace didn't speak. When she finally did, her words weren't polished like orders. They were frayed honest. "You walked away from glory to be a good man," she whispered. "The world doesn't deserve that kind of strength." "Maybe not." His voice barely held. "But she does." Grace blinked back something unsaid. If life had been kinder. Michael's gaze settled on her tired, grateful, unarmored. "If life had been kinder, Admiral, maybe I would have met you first." The wind quieted just for them. Her breath hitched. "There is a place in my life," she said, voice low, breaking in the middle, that would have held you. "And there is a place in mine," he answered softly, "where I did hold you, even if only in another life." They didn't move, didn't reach, didn't steal from fate what fate had never promised. Emily came running back, wrapping her arms around her father's leg. "Daddy, are we leaving right now?" Michael lowered to kneel. "Yes, sweetheart." She turned to Grace and suddenly hugged her around the waist, not shy, not small, full of innocence and certainty. "I like you," Emily whispered. "You're safe." Grace froze, not from surprise, but from emotion too big for a uniform. She placed her hand gently on Emily's hair. "You have his heart," she whispered. "The world will be all right if you carry it." Emily pulled back and smiled, unaware she'd just given a grieving world permission to breathe again. Michael stood. Grace swallowed once, twice, then found the strength inside duty that so often hides inside pain. "If you ever need anything," she said quietly, "a home, a harbor, my door does not close." Michael nodded, voice grounded, gentle, carrying all the loyalty he could offer without betraying the life he chose. "And if the world ever needs someone who knows how to stand alone, you know where to find me." She stepped forward, not a lover's approach, but something deeper. Two warriors honoring a battlefield, neither wished to win. "Goodbye, Michael." He shook his head, eyes warm. "No, not goodbye." He touched his 2 fingers to the brim of an invisible cap, an unspoken salute of equals, not ranks. Until peace, he murmured. Grace's breath caught. She mirrored the gesture, no medals between them, now only truth. Until peace. Michael turned, lifting Emily into his arms. She waved her rose with pride as they walked toward the waiting tenderboat below. Crew members they passed, bowed heads, not formality, but gratitude, recognition, quiet blessing. And Grace stood alone on the vast deck, watching a father carry the world he chose. No music, no fanfare, only dignity. When they reached the gangway, Emily looked back one last time and held her rose-high petals, catching sun like stars. Grace Whitmore lifted her gaze to the sky and let the wind sting her eyes so she wouldn't have to call the tears anything else. Softly, only for the ocean, she whispered, "If life gives you peace, may it be gentle." Michael didn't turn, but his hand lifted once more, a silhouette against dawn. And then he was gone, leaving behind no medals, only honor, only healing, only a rose petal in the wind. The harbor stirred awake beneath a watercolor dawn, soft pinks, bleeding into pale gold. A tugboat's horn sounded in the distance, low, steady, carrying the same tone as a man who has seen war and chooses peace anyway. Michael Carter stepped off the small carrier tender boots, meeting wooden pier planks. Emily held his hand, humming, bouncing slightly with each step. To the world, they were just a father and daughter, beginning a new morning. To him, they were survivors, stepping out of memory and into life. Emily lifted a rose fresh, dew-kissed. She held it proudly like a flag of innocence. "Daddy, the ocean smells like pancakes today," he smiled. "Everything smells like pancakes when you're 6, she giggled. "We should get pancakes. We will. With extra syrup. And strawberries." "And strawberries," he echoed. The dock was quiet save for gulls and gentle waves. No salutes, no whistles, no boots striking steel. Just wood beneath feet and sunlight beginning its slow climb. Michael inhaled. A simple morning breeze, yet it tasted like freedom. Not escape. Completion. A nearby commuter ferry idled. Civilians in jackets and backpacks moved around them, business as usual. 1 or 2 glanced curiously at the tall, quiet man with the worn jacket and the child with the rose. No recognition. No whispers. Just life moving forward. He liked that. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, yes, Angel." "Will the nice Admiral lady be okay without us?" Michael paused. His heart had learned long ago that separation didn't mean loss. It meant trust. "She'll be more than okay," he said gently. "People like her. They protect others even when no one sees." Emily considered this deeply. "Like you." He knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her eyes were bright. She was everything he fought for: softness in a world addicted to steel. "No," he whispered. "Better than me. She protects all of this. I just protect you." Emily nodded, satisfied. "That's the best job anyway." He swallowed. She always found the truth without trying. They crossed the pier to where a taxi waited. Not a military escort, not a convoy, just a standard yellow cab engine rumbling quietly. Normal. A life many men prayed for in their darkest foxholes. Michael opened the back door for Emily. She climbed in, hugging her backpack like a teddy bear. He slid in beside her, the seat dipping under his weight. The cab drove off, tires crunching gravel before rolling onto smooth pavement. As the harbor shrank behind them, Emily pressed her nose to the window, marveling as boats got smaller and city buildings grew larger. "Daddy, what does peace feel like?" Michael stared out at the passing water, sunlight glimmering like reflections of battles long gone. "It feels like this." She leaned against him. Then, I like peace. So do I. He looked down at her rose, its red petals contrasting the gray cityscape. It reminded him of the one she gave him that morning on the carrier deck, before the world remembered who he used to be. Before he reminded himself who he wanted to be now. The cab turned along a coastal road overlooking the bay. Far behind them, the aircraft carrier's silhouette lingered like a monument in the mist. Emily didn't notice it anymore, but Michael did. From this distance, the ship looked like a toy in a bathtub, small, almost fragile. But the people on it, unbreakable. Honor lived there, and hope. A subtle motion caught his eye. Up on the carrier deck, tiny against the skyline, the faintest outline of a woman stood at the rail. Grace Whitmore, watching the horizon. Watching him. He didn't lift his hand, not visibly, but a breath left him gentle and full. Respect carried on wind instead of gesture. Emily saw none of this. She only saw the city unfolding. "Daddy, when we get pancakes, can we sit by the window so the sun sits with us?" "Yes," he murmured. "The sun will sit with us." "And can we plant roses?" He smiled. "We'll plant as many as the world will hold." She nodded, confident. "And they won't be lonely. We'll be there." His chest tightened, not in pain, but in profound gratitude for second chances, disguised as small daily questions. The cab slowed at a quiet neighborhood cafe, windows fogged from early coffee brewing. A chalkboard sign read, "Breakfast makes heroes of us all." Michael huffed a tiny laugh. Fitting. He lifted Emily from the seat, setting her down gently. She reached up, taking his hand again. Not because she needed to, but because she could. They entered the cafe, bells chiming softly. The scent of pancakes and maple syrup welcomed them. A waitress smiled, handing Emily a coloring sheet. "Two?" she asked. "Just us two," Michael replied. Emily corrected cheerfully. "Three, we brought a rose." The waitress blinked, then smiled warmly. "That sounds like a perfect party." They sat by the window. Sunlight slid across their table. Emily placed her rose next to the napkin dispenser like a centerpiece. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice as delicate as morning light. "Are we safe now?" Michael held her gaze. "Yes," he said. Not bravado. Truth. "We're safe. Will bad guys ever come again?" "If they do," he said softly, "they'll find a gardener, not a soldier." Emily frowned, thinking, "Gardeners have shovels." Michael chuckled. "Exactly." She giggled. "And roses." He touched her hand. "And roses." Outside, the world moved cars. Dogs, joggers, baristas, steaming milk for strangers who would never know what battles some men chose not to fight. Emily hummed, coloring a sunrise. Michael watched her sipping quiet peace like medicine. He whispered, "Not prayer, not wish, but realization. Some people live so they can be remembered, and some live so they can disappear in peace. I choose her, and in choosing her, I choose the world." A breeze pushed through the door as another patron entered, and Emily's rose petal fluttered, gently catching light like a tiny stained glass window. She looked up and whispered, "For the Admiral lady. So she won't be alone." Michael nodded. The sea will carry it to her. And somewhere across that water, Grace Whitmore stood watching dawn break and whispered into the wind, believing without knowing why. "One day, Michael, the world you carried will finally let you rest." The cafe door closed again. The world continued. A rose petal danced on sunlight, and Michael Carter, father, survivor, quiet hero, held peace in one hand and possibility in the other. Not a legend now, just a man. Finally, living. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Let us know down in the comments. It warms our hearts to see people from all across the world sharing these quiet moments of faith, kindness, and courage together. And if this story touched you, even just a little, I gently invite you to subscribe to our channel. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but so our community of good hearts can continue to grow, and so these healing stories find the people who need them most. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until the next story, may peace find you, and may kindness always lead you home.